And we're straight up noon, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of an intro before we actually start the class. And for those of you that are members of the virtual studio, you have access to these notes in the member website page. So I talked about this being a spine mobility class. And ultimately, the muscles that control your spine are actually your core muscles. So we could just say strong core, healthy spine, strong core, strong spine. So that's something to keep in mind as we do this class, is we're not just working on the muscles that move the spine, but we're also training the core to be able to control the spine in whatever it is that we're going to be moving, whatever kind of movement it is. So when you train the core, you're also essentially training your spinal muscles. Just a couple of kind of short little snippets of how I think about this stuff. And this is through studies and things like that. And I can send you all sorts of resources if you need it. But a lot of times in yoga and movement classes and even physical fitness classes, like when we're lifting weights and things like that, we hear teachers or instructors say, engage your core. I think that might be one of the most common cues that I hear in classes that I go to. And raise your hand if you've ever heard that cue in a class, engage your core, right? So what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear engage your core? Like the first area of the body. You can either point to it or say it. Yeah, so like the stuff you can see, right? The six pack, the rectus abdominis. When actually our core it's 360 degrees around the trunk. Your glutes are part of your core, your lats are part of your core. So it goes beyond just the visible abs that we like to get defined in. And our core operates not because we're thinking about engaging our core and we're demanding that from like a mental standpoint, but our core is reflexive, or at least we want it to be. And in order to train the core to be reflexive, we have to put our body into positions that require us to adapt to whatever shape that we're making without really having to think about it. And I'll just give you an example of how your core can stabilize you in a real life scenario, and how you don't always have time to think. I need to engage my multifidus in my back to prevent injury in my spine. Say you're walking down a sidewalk, or you're going to cross the crosswalk, and you step a little bit, you step off the curb, and you don't know it's there. Like you're looking at your phone and you step off the curb. You don't have time in that moment to figure out which muscles need to protect your spine or stabilize your body. Your body knows how to do that automatically if you've trained it that way. So this class, we're going to do some really focused work on moving the spine, but we're also going to perturb ourselves in really common positions that we use in yoga, and see if our core can respond and adapt to the demand of that different shape. So that'll become really clear once we get into this. Does everybody have a book or a yoga block or something that they can use as a prop for this? If you don't, it's no big deal. You can always, you can always do it later. The last thing I wanted you to think about during this class is your nervous system is always ahead of any conscious muscular engagement. So when you're in a class and your teacher is saying to you, step your right foot forward and come up to warrior one, engage your core is the last thing that they say. In order for you to get to where you just went to that warrior one, your core has already organized that. Your body is so wise. It's a self-organizing system. Just the action of that teacher instructing you to step your right foot forward and to come up into a warrior one, your core has already done all of the preliminary work required to make that shape. So when she says to you last, engage your core, it's a little bit pointless because your body already figured that out. And in yoga, because we're not dealing with loads, like we're not lifting big heavy weights, we're not throwing around sandbags, there's not a lot of risk in not contracting and engaging your core in a position like, let's just say, warrior one. Yes, we want the spine to be supported and maybe in a neutral position, but that doesn't mean we have to be rigid. We want our core to be responsive, not rigid, in a nutshell. Does that make sense to everybody where we're going with this? Cool, cool, cool. Okay, start on your back, please. Some of this I'm going to demonstrate and some of it I'm just going to be watching you. And if you've got a quiet space, it's okay to keep yourself on unmute. If it gets too noisy though, I might mute you, because if you have questions, it's okay to ask me during this. This can be a two-way communication. In this first little bit, just like you to make yourself comfortable on your back, either with your legs bent or straight. Dorothy, are you signaling me? I can't hear you right now. Hold on. Oh. You're just making sure what, honey? Oh, okay. Okay, good. Good enough. All right, just want to make sure you can hear me. Okay, so this first little bit is just time for you to kind of center yourself, begin your practice with some sort of awareness to breathing, and that might mean just you paying attention to your breath. And when you're breathing in and out through your nose, notice where you feel the expansion happening the most. So maybe right now you're really feeling your ribs move, maybe your belly's moving a little bit. If we're sensing a lot of movement up in the upper chest or shoulders or neck, let's make an attempt or an effort to move that breath a little bit lower into our trunk and especially out to the sides of our rib cage. Finding that wide lateral style of breath. You can think about like the bellows breath without overdoing that. You don't have to breathe longer. Just try to breathe bigger. Take up a little more space. I personally find it useful to take just kind of a natural inhale without trying to make it too much, and then really slowing down the exhale so that it feels like it's trickling out. You might know of a better way for you to breathe. During the class, I'm going to ask you to move different areas on your spine. So sometimes we'll be moving the lumbar, sometimes we'll be moving the head and neck, sometimes we'll be moving just the T-spine. And those micro level movements, even thinking about moving one vertebra at a time, are really supportive to our global spine movements. So for example, if we can really control the amount of extension we have in our upper back in, let's say, cow pose, then we have a better chance for success in a really big back bend, like camel pose or wheel pose, where our load can be evenly distributed throughout the whole spine, rather than just defaulting to kind of like the path of least resistance, which for most people is in their lumbar. Bend your knees, please. Take your feet about hip width. And we're going to begin to rock the pelvis. So this is a very simplified movement just in the pelvis and the low back, where we tuck under and try to kind of get the low back to press into the ground. And then we can anteriorly tilt the pelvis and kind of rock the tailbone down towards the earth as our low back lifts slightly off the ground. It may not feel like a whole lot of movement here in either direction, depending on your movement history and what you've been up to lately. This might be pretty small in comparison to cat-cow. You can think of your pelvis like a bowl. And when we try to rock the pelvis into that forward tilt, we're trying to pour the contents of the bowl forward towards our thigh bones. That's when our low back lifts. That's the anterior tilt. And then if we tried to pour the contents of the bowl back towards our shoulders, our tailbone would curl up and our lower back would get a little longer and a little closer to the ground. Do 2 more like that, noticing any sensation around your breathing, any sensation in your low back or your front core. And then maintain your posterior pelvic tuck. That's the one where you feel like your low back is long, pressing into the floor. Press down through your feet. And see if you can just lift only the tailbone and sacrum a little higher. Keep your low back into the ground. This is where we're going to find that articulation. For those of you that practice with me in public classes, this is really the only way I teach bridge pose anymore. We all know we can get up to bridge with our spine in a piece like a board, but it's a different scenario to articulate and go slow through this wave. Lift maybe just a few of your lumbar off the floor. So now maybe just the sacrum and a few of the lumbar vertebrae are lifted and the back ribs are still down. Now lift most of your low back off the ground, but keep your ribs firmly rooted. You're going to fire the glutes here as well to extend the hips. Let's go just a few more vertebrae at a time now. As slow as you can, working up to what feels like a pretty moderate bridge pose without overdoing the spine extension. We're just trying to kind of feel our way into fully extended hips, as if you could de-wrinkle the creases in the front of your pants. Now, while you're up here, also find this action of your heels, not just pushing down towards the floor, but also trying to pull backwards towards your hips. And see if you can feel your hamstrings fire up when you do that. Is your neck relaxed? Can we do anything around the head, neck, and shoulders to just bring some ease there? Now keep what you have in the legs and the hips, keeping your glutes aware and awake and supportive, and start to travel down from the top, lowering each vertebra independent from the one that came before it. Take all the time you need to go super duper slow. And then I'd like you to try that one more time at your own pace. There's no rushing, right? There's nowhere to get to. It's just time for you to explore this particular movement and see how much control you have at each level of your spine. You can spend 1 or 2 breaths at the top of your bridge when you land there, and then just breathe naturally as you come back down nice and slow. Trying to find that side body breath rather than getting a whole bunch of movement in the front ribs. Let your low ribs be heavy instead. Okay, looks like everybody's pretty well completed that cycle. So I'm going to show you another variation of this, and if you had a chair, an ottoman, something that you wanted to use for this next little bit, in the next variation of this bridge, we will not just be extending the low back, but we're also going to be flexing the upper back. So I'll show you first, and then you can join in if you want. Your chair or your ottoman is going to need to be on your mat so it doesn't slip. And don't worry if you didn't have time to gather a chair or an ottoman. You could still repeat the spine articulation just like you did it the first time in bridge pose. I'll give you a moment to get that set up. Yep. So you're going to start reclined again with either your heels on the seat, or you could put the middle arch kind of on the corner of the seat. You'll have to see what you like better. And we'll start once again with the posterior tuck, pressing into the chair with your feet and lifting just the lumbar spine off of the ground, keeping the back of your ribs connected to the earth and your neck relaxed. And then you're going to lower it down like a rope, going slow. Hover your arms a few inches off the mat, thumb side of the hand up, tuck your chin and start to curl and flex your upper body into a little bit of a core crunch. And then lower that down. Right as you land, start to tuck the bum under and lift the low back again. The hips will raise into extension. And then lower the spine, nice and slow, as you start to curl and lift the upper body. Now I want you to think about the middle part of your back being like the bottom of a boat. And that part's always going to like be the transition between the hip extension and the spine flexion as you curl and lift. And then you might be able to maintain that sense of spine flexion, keep your head and shoulders floating, and kind of rock on the bottom of that boat. So I'm doing that right now if you want to stop and see what that looks like. Head and shoulders stay up, spine stays flexed on top, and hips extend at the bottom. Give yourself about 5 to 8 of those. I'm going to take a peek. So the two things eventually will become one thing. One happens and then transforms into the other. So head and shoulders can stay up and you can really flex the spine, almost like you're doing a crunch or a sit-up. Well, let's try, I don't know, finish up your 5 to 8, depending on how fast or how slow you're going. There's no rush to get anywhere. Nice, Dorothy. Yeah, try to tuck under even more so that your lower back feels like it's pressing into the ground. And I think you might be a little far away from your bench. You might move a little closer to the bench. That will help your hamstrings a whole lot. Or your hamstrings starting to cramp. Jeff, that's really good. Yes. Okay. After you finish that, take a few breaths just in a neutral position. You can move your ottoman or your chair off to the side. And then you can rock and roll your way up to a seat. And we're going to come into a position that looks a little bit like child's pose, but not quite all the way. Your knees can be a little wider than your hips. Your big toes can touch. If you don't like to sit all the way back towards your heels, that's totally fine. You can kind of work into this more moderate version. We're going to bring the arms a little wider and drop your hips back until they stop. So even if they don't touch your heels, just think about reaching your hips backwards as you stretch your spine forwards, almost like you're trying to decompress your spine. And it will really help you here to keep your wrists wider than your shoulders with just a little bit of a turnout at the fingers. Now we're going to try to keep our lower back still and our pelvis still. So you can even think about doing a kind of like a cat pose just in your lower body. And we're just going to focus our extension effort on the upper thoracic spine. So think sternum. Think of lifting your sternum forward. Maybe the gaze even lifts up a little bit. This is a small movement compared to cat-cow. And then pull your bottom sternum in towards your spine and tuck your chin and round up your back a little bit. Let's try that a few times. We're blocking the low body and try to just mobilize only the upper T-spine. Head moves last. So if you feel like your head is just nodding up and down, try to minimize that and move from the center of your sternum first. And the head moves last. Yes, nice, Lori. And you can feel the work in the front of your core when you do that dome-like shape. And then you can prioritize the work in the back of your spine as you pull your heart forward into that extended position. So notice where the work is happening to make these two shapes. Is it happening in the front? Is it happening in the back? And is there a lot of activity in the shoulders? Or are we able to kind of keep the shoulders pretty quiet and put the work instead into the core, into those front core muscles, back core muscles? And we've had enough of that. You can take a little rest again. How'd that go? Okay, so next step, we're going to mobilize just the pelvis and the low back, and we're going to kind of block the upper body. How we can block the upper body is to come into a tabletop on the forearms instead. Bring your hips over your knees. Land your elbows under your shoulders, forearms touching the ground, and then you're going to tuck your chin and really lightly place the crown of your head down onto your yoga mat, but keep a lot of space in your neck. Almost like you're going to do a headstand, but we're not going to do that. Now you're going to mobilize the low body. Lift the tailbone up and extend into your lumbar. That would be the back bend. And then drop your tailbone down and try to flex into your lumbar. Nothing else moves, so the upper body stays super quiet. I'm just going to adjust this mic. It's not in a great spot. Try to keep your upper body almost with a hint of cat pose. So you're kind of widening that upper body without shrugging the shoulders. And try 2 to 3 more pelvic rocks. Anytime the pelvis moves, the low back moves too. And then go ahead and rest in either a child's pose or a simple kneeling pose. Breathe out your sides. Find that 360-degree expansion around your breath, or excuse me, around your spine with your breath. And next we're going to be exploring that reflexive core response that I mentioned. There's lots of different ways we can do this. This is just one that is pretty simple to find in a very familiar position, which is our tabletop position. So let's start in the tabletop. And because we're going to be on our wrists a little bit, let's do just a little bit of wrist prep. So as you come into your tabletop, just kind of move your body weight around the wrist and intentionally press into the base of index knuckle, pinky knuckle, thumb knuckle. Spread out your fingers. Go the other way. And with one hand, bring the back of your hand to the mat. So now that you're in wrist flexion, stretch the opposite side. And you can move a little bit here too. And then switch sides. Trying to stay in a pain-free range of motion in both of these. And then come back to your tabletop. If you feel like you would benefit from decreasing the amount of extension that you have in your wrists, you could walk your wrists a little bit forward. I know a lot of times we say that the wrists need to be stacked under the shoulders, but that really just changes the load in the wrists. It's not necessarily better or worse. So find a position that feels about right for you. And you're going to both push your hands down into the ground, and at the same time, think of pulling your arms backwards towards your knees, and that won't actually happen because your hands are grounded, but just find that sense of pull and notice what you feel. And then kind of relax into your tabletop, make it a little bit lazy, maybe even sink into the shoulders, let the belly drop, let your spine extend, kind of like a lazy cow pose. And then we'll add on another layer. Find a strong tabletop, level out your spine with the horizon. Try to find your natural curves in the neck, the lumbar, and the upper back. Tuck your toes under like you would for downward dog. And then just float the knees an inch or so. As you float your knees, think of dragging your hands back again towards your knees, and notice what you feel in your core. And then set your knees down. And for those of you that have your mics unmuted, did you feel any kind of automatic response in your core when you did that? Yeah. Even a nodding of the head's good. Okay, so that's what I mean by reflexive core. I didn't tell you to draw your navel to your spine. I didn't tell you to lift through your pelvic floor. I didn't tell you to cinch your waist like a corset. But the moment that you lifted your knees and kind of changed the position a little bit, your core self-organized. And when you add in that pulling motion, that also kind of fires the lats, which are a big part of our core stabilization strategy. So let's try it again. And we're going to change things a little bit. Tabletop position. Tuck the toes. Float your knees an inch or so. Try to keep level with the horizon spine curves. And now see if you can move back into that pelvic tuck and tilt as you keep your upper back quiet. Rock the pelvis under and then up. And under and then up. 2 more. Tuck down and then pour it forward. Yeah, good. Try not to move the head too much. No movement in the upper back. T, I see that. And take a little rest. Okay. Grab your block or your book or whatever you brought for your little surprise movement that we're going to do. This is going to challenge our reflexive core even more, because we're going to need to figure out a way to keep the block in the starting position as we perturb the body a little bit more. So I'm going to give you some choices on how to do that. The first thing that we'll do is set the block on its low side so that this is going to be a little bit easier, right? Set the block on the low side. It's not so tall like a skyscraper. Find your tabletop. So this should be not in your low back, not resting in your low back like a hammock, but down on your sacrum. So it feels like it's literally balancing there. Find a sense of rooting down through the strength of your hands and fingers. Tuck your toes. Float your knees that 1 inch off the ground. Nothing else changes. Find that pulling strategy from the lats. And then see if you can lift your right toes off the ground and just kick your heel towards your right bottom. And then set it down. And then the left. Everything else stays the same, responsive. And then set it down. Now, with or without your knees hovering, we can try to take away one arm. Maybe it's just a little. Maybe you just come onto the fingertips. Is your block staying level? And then switch. That side's harder for me. Now, before we move any further, take a moment to rest. Set your knees down. Find your breath again. And if you wanted to challenge yourself for this next little bit, you would take your block up on the second side so it's a little higher. This would be the side that we call the radio side. The flattest side is the cake. The highest side is the skyscraper. Now we're going to add in some contralateral movement. Our goal here is to not disturb the block and to not disturb the natural presentation of our spine. So for me, I have a pretty obvious low back curve. And some people don't have that. Some people have a relatively straight low back. So we just need to kind of feel out what our neutral is. And that takes some time to develop that awareness. So don't expect to know that today if you don't already know it. Find that hover again. Press your toes down. Lift your knees. With opposite hand and foot, take a tiny step forward. Doesn't matter which way you go first. Try not to disturb the block. Keep your spine level with the horizon. Now step the opposite. Maybe it's left hand, right foot. Tiny little steps. Block stays level with the shoulders. And you might crawl all the way off your mat. And then crawl back. Stay low with the knees. They're barely off the ground. If my block falls, you'll know it because it makes a really loud noise because it's cork. You can take this further if you wanted to go for another round. Or you can rest. How are we doing? I'm going to come take a peek. See if you can keep your knees under your hips and your seat low. Yeah, that's it, Jeff. Nice, Tisha. Yes, that's perfect. Beauty. Good, Matthew. How many blocks did we have drop? A few, I'm guessing. Okay. If you're still working on that, keep going. But for those of you that are going to rest for a moment, notice what you're feeling in the core. I mean, I'm feeling it on my sides, my obliques. I'm feeling it even in my back muscles, my back core. And of course, I'm feeling it in the front, my rectus abdominis as well, and the TVA. So this is what we mean by core responsiveness versus core rigidity. Because we know that our real life experiences are not rigid at all. They're very dynamic. And because our nervous system is always one step ahead, we can train that responsiveness. That will be more supportive for our spine than trying to contain and brace and corset through the core, through the abs. Okay, we are ready to move on to the next little bit. Everything we've done so far has been the simplified movement of flexion extension. We almost always start there. It's the least complicated movement. So we always want to start with that before we start layering in more complicated movements. This is where you're going to need a low bench or a seat or 2 yoga blocks stacked like so that you have a little perch to squat on like yogi squat malasana. If you didn't have either of those 2 things, like a low bench or yoga blocks, you could actually just sit in a chair and do this, because we're going to be mobilizing the upper body only. And we're going to try to keep really strong and stable through the hips, through the feet, and really working on mobilizing just the upper body. So let's start with the squatting position and an upright spine, and then fingertips towards the back of the head, with the elbows just landing where they feel comfortable. So for now, you don't have to worry about really opening them or closing them. We're just trying to feel what, with neutral curves, what is the best position for your elbows to be in right now. We're going to do just a few sets of the cat-cow-like movement before we explore some lateral bending and rotation. And your breathing could be timed with these movements, but it doesn't have to. You could just continue to breathe normally. Let's try to shorten up the front side of the body by flexing, but keep your pelvis still. Flex just the upper body. Notice that it might help you to bring your elbows a little closer together and widen your shoulder blades across your back. Be mindful you're not pulling on your neck. And then do just the opposite. Start to lift and lengthen your sternum skyward. Elbows might come a little wider now as you try to broaden through your upper body in front and squeeze those upper back muscles. Think camel pose here. And then let's just do 2 more. See if you can move your head last. Move that mid to upper spine first. Pelvis stays neutral, so we are not tucking the pelvis here. Try to sit pretty balanced on your sitting bones. The next time you come back upright out of that flexed position and out of the extension, come back to neutral. Keep your right arm out like this in the wing. Take your left arm across and hold on to whatever you can get a hold of with that right leg. Maybe it's the front of your knee, maybe it's your shin. And you're going to keep a hold with that left arm and start to open your chest towards the right while you keep your navel facing forwards. You can allow your shoulder blade to help you here. And then just come back to facing neutral. Opening up that T-spine to the right. And then back forward. 1 more like that. Mobilizing that upper body. And then coming back to face center. Now straighten your right arm out to the side. We're going to think of moving into a diagonal here. So you are going to open again to the right, but then as you come back to facing forwards, let's flex again and reach our right arm across our body as we pull the right leg away from the body. Inhale, rise up, vertical spine, open your chest and right arm. Exhale, rotate and flex and reach as your right leg pulls away. Last one. You can use a little hand against leg leverage here, keeping that right thigh moving away from your body as you reach your right arm across to the left. And then come back to neutral and just relax everything. Sit up into your squat. Notice anything over here in the right ribs, hopefully. Right side body. And then let's go right hand behind the head. Left arm behind the head. Right arm's going to cross over and hold on to the left leg, and you're just spiraling open, just in the rib cage. And then just face center. Send a lengthening wave up your spine as you open your chest to the left. And then keep all that length as you rotate forward again. Keep your legs moving outward. So you're using that as a little bit of traction almost. Keep what you have with the right hand and left leg. Extend your left arm out to the side like a wing. Open your chest into that rotated position. And then crisscross out in front of you, flex your spine, and reach your left arm to the right as you pull your left leg outward. 2 more times. Last one. Great. Okay, and just settle in for a moment. Take it easy. Maybe your eyes close briefly. So I can see from the notes that I made that I have about probably 2 hours of material. So we're not going to get through all this. Those of you that have the notes, we're not going to get through all this. So we'll do it maybe next week. We'll do kind of a continuation. Let's come back to our tabletop position. Your blocks can go to the side. Same remarks apply to the wrists. If you feel like you don't want to load them as much, you would walk your wrists forward slightly so your arms are more on a diagonal line rather than vertical. And now we're going to do some lateral spine movement. So on the first set, the upper body is going to stay still. Neck, head, shoulders, ribs, all of that's going to stay the same, but we're going to wag the tailbone and the pelvis side to side, as if you were trying to bring your left hip towards your right shoulder, but your right shoulder isn't trying to meet it. And then go the other way. Try to keep those level spine curves. So you're not exaggerating the dip in the low back if you have one, but you're also not trying to get rid of it. So there's really no cat-cow in this. It's just moving into almost like a side crunch from the pelvis. Yeah, if your head and shoulders are moving around a lot, try to stabilize there. Keep those kind of in the same place. And one more time, right and left. One side stretching while the other side is contracting. Now level it out. This time we're going to keep the pelvis in one spot, and we're going to try to crunch the upper body laterally. So if you're trying to pull your right shoulder towards your right hip, but your right hip isn't playing along, your right hip's just going to stay there. You might feel this in your lats, serratus, especially if you're also trying to isometrically drag your hands towards your knees. Is your head moving around a lot, or can we just let the head follow the spine? That's it. Now let's put all that together and move both the hip and the upper body, so pelvis and trunk are trying to meet in the middle. So now this would be considered more of a global position. The first thing that we did, I would consider more of kind of like a micro level movement where we're just asking one area to do the thing before we ask the other area to do the thing, and then finally both. Okay, sit back onto your heels or onto your yoga block. Take a moment or two to notice how the obliques are feeling. All those other muscles on the side body. And I saved what I feel are the most challenging movements for last. Now that we've done a good variety, we're going to do some work from our belly. And I always refer to movements like these in my classes as not back bends, but opportunities to strengthen our spine or spine strengthening practices. Because back bends implies that it's a really big, maybe somewhat glamorous movement. And these are definitely not that. These are low return on your investment movements. So a lot of effort, maybe not a lot of lift. And we'll do a couple different variations. Come down onto your tummies, please, and stretch your legs straight back behind you. Bring your forearms to stack out in front of you. Elbows can stay a little wider, and then just stack one hand on the other and rest your forehead either on your hands, or you can make fists and rest your forehead on your fists. What feels better in your neck? We're going to posteriorly tuck the pelvis. That means you're trying to drop your tailbone in between your thighs and kind of ground through the pubic bone. It's as if you were trying to shorten the space between the front rim of your pelvis and your rib cage. Try to keep that. So it's like you're trying to do cat pose with your lower body, but you can't really do that because you're on the ground. Press your right leg really firmly into the floor, including the top of your foot. Squeeze your left glutes and try to lift your left leg any amount without bringing any wrinkles into your low back. So trying not to extend in your low back. Again, this is probably a pretty small movement. You can think of lifting from your hamstrings and your glutes, and then let that rest. Press down through your left foot, once again connecting to that posterior tuck of the pelvis, and float your right leg a little. If you start to feel it in your back, recalibrate and put the work in just the glutes. Did your left side lift at all? Try to anchor the left front hip down. And let's do each leg twice more. You're on your own as far as pacing. Stay there as long as you like. Keep your pelvis even, balanced, connected. I'm going to the right again. Last set, left. And last set, right. And then take it easy. If it helps you to just turn your head to one side and lay your cheek onto your mat, that's cool. And then let's go arms beside our body. Palms facing your hips and your arms just floating slightly off the ground. Retuck the bum. You're going to try to lift your arms a little bit without lifting the chest. So we don't really need to be in a back bend here. And then laterally crunch your upper body as if you could reach your left fingertips towards your left heel. And then come back through the center. Keep that posterior tuck, side crunch to the right, and back to the center. Now, if you wanted to explore this in a locust-like position, you could curl your upper body off the ground as if you were trying to arc it over a beach ball, but it doesn't have to be very high. Squeeze your shoulder blades together, crunch left. Try to keep your right front hip down, it wants to lift. Back to the center, and crunch to the right. Breathe out your sides. One more each way, either with spine extension or without. Keeping your legs strong, glutes on, low back long, and then take a little rest. The nice thing about this kind of work is you don't need all that many repetitions, especially at first. A couple is usually more than enough to start. Okay, last variation on our belly, and then we're gonna leave some time for discussion. Bring your elbows back out like you had them, forearms about parallel to the ground. Find that posterior tuck, let your head float off the ground. And then here we're going to keep the right side down, right side of the arm down rather. So the right arm's gonna stay down, the pelvis is gonna stay balanced, and you're gonna try to peel open with your left chest, and your left arm is gonna come up. And then lower back down. Just rotating the upper body only, and trying not to change the weight in your pelvis. And then let's do 2 more like that. Nice. Yes. It's okay to say oofta on this one. After you've done 3 on each side, it's okay to rest. If you'd like to rest in child's or all the way down onto your stomach, either one's good. If you feel like you might benefit from a little spine decompression, you could head to a downward dog. Trying to stretch your hips up and away from your strong arms as they root down. Feel free to pedal a little bit, wiggle around in your down dog. We've done just enough work, hopefully in the shoulders, that down dog feels okay. And then let's all meet in a downward dog. We're gonna try one more thing, this will be it. So seeing if we can connect to that reflexive core, trusting ourselves a little bit, and also knowing that it's okay to wibble wobble a little bit. That is how we get a responsive core. We allow the body to come out of balance and see if we can kind of recalibrate. So from downward dog, come up onto the right fingertips. So lift the palm of your right hand kind of like a creature finger. And then kick your left leg back. Just float it off the ground and reach it back. It doesn't have to be a lot, maybe just a foot. If that still feels really stable and you're not wobbling around too much, you can try to lift your right arm as well, any amount. Notice the reorganization that's happening. If this is still really simple and easy for you, move your right arm and left leg around randomly, purposely trying to disturb your balance and see if your core can respond. That doesn't mean you're going to stick it and nail it. It means you're going to be able to hold the position even as you try to kind of throw it off. And then take a little rest. Come down onto your knees. Sit back to child's or kneeling. And then one more time to the down dog. You could also do this in a tabletop, right? It'd be kind of like a bird dog position with one arm and one leg extended, the opposites. Downward facing dog, come up onto the left fingertips, keep your right arm strong. Float your right leg. And as you float your right leg, fire up the right glutes. Let your left heel be heavy. Maybe the left hand comes all the way off the ground. If that's strong, then start to move left arm, right leg. In just any random pattern. Notice you're not having to constantly engage or consciously engage anything, but yet you can feel some of that work in your core. And then we rest. Make yourselves comfortable in a seated or upright kneeling position. You can sit on your blocks or your bench. I'm gonna unmute all y'all. If you really don't want to be unmuted. Oh, I can't unmute you. Y'all have to unmute yourself. Sorry, I thought I could do it on my end. Hey, Jack. Okay, so let's ask any questions that we might have. Or just remarks about anything. What did you notice? What did you feel? Do you understand where I'm coming from on this, or is it like really out there? Yeah. Yeah? Yeah, good. It's a little bit out of the yoga landscape, but all of this stuff that we do in classes like this will really help your yoga a lot. That's the good news. Nice. That is good. Love it. Cool. Yeah, you and I have talked about that before. I get it. Well, that's definitely something I need to schedule then. I can give you one suggestion that would be what I would consider to be a daily maintenance practice, and that is just a simple shoulder car that we've done in class before, where you're getting the external rotation and flexion and the internal rotation and extension with control, and then reversing that. So you're just really focusing on this joint right here. And so every muscle that really both stabilizes and moves the shoulder is getting a little bit of attention there. The second layer of that could just be scapular retraction and protraction without moving your spine. So this could be the spine movement, so that would feel a little bit like cat-cow, but if we just move the shoulders, or the shoulder blades rather, let them kind of glide on the rib cage, that usually eases any discomfort that I have, especially like around my scapula or in my traps. Although when I'm doing these movements, sometimes it doesn't feel great. Sometimes it feels like it would be counterintuitive, like, oh, this actually makes me feel tight. But oftentimes when we have these sensations of tightness, whether it's in our hips or around our neck or shoulders, it's oftentimes because those areas aren't getting good neural feedback, like we're not using them enough. For example, if I'm using my right arm a lot to do something and my left arm's just kind of hanging out there not doing anything, I might start to get some discomfort maybe in this side because of repetitive, but on this side because I haven't done anything with it and those muscles are just dying to contract and do their job, which is to move bones and joints. So sometimes we're thinking, oh, I need to stretch because I feel tight, but actually almost always what you need is just a little bit of juice there, like actual movement and maybe even a little bit of load, like with a resistance band or something. Something to keep in mind. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. It's just your back isn't going to be level. The other thing I would try to do is to just unload that area a little bit with some sort of an implement, like that brace do you have those braces that like Belinda had? Remember that little sling she had? Oh. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, it's not really a movement that is like required, but yeah, I think you could do that. It's just that you would be at more of a slope. So you see how my seat's higher than my shoulders? That's gonna change the relationship to the core, but it's actually just changing the relationship. It's just changing the load. So it might actually put more load in your shoulders and you might feel the work there more. But I think it's because it's such a similar movement pattern, I don't think there'd be anything wrong with that. but you wouldn't have to do that one. You could just skip that one altogether. There's plenty of other things that we could do that wouldn't require you to be on your wrists. The other thing you could try, which I've had some people say they really don't like this idea, because if you don't have the strength to do it, you could, you know, actually injure your wrist. But I've had people do it on their fists instead, so that the wrists are straight. You could. That's what Mindy does in my classes. So she holds the dumbbells. You could definitely do that if you can keep your wrists nice and straight and stable. But to me, that requires, you know, more stability in the wrist. Whereas when I'm like this, I've got more surface. When I'm like this, I have less surface, and now I have to control this movement. It doesn't hurt your thumb? I think it'd be fine to do that. I think it'd be fine to do that, really. Yeah, I would try it and see what you think of it, and then let me know. So I wanted to read you guys one thing before we break, and if you have to go, I understand, but this was kind of a light bulb moment as I was researching all of this stuff well over a year ago. And it comes from a study on core stability. So it was an athletic performance study. And the abstract reads, dynamic neuromuscular / core stability is necessary for optimal athletic performance and is not achieved by adequate strength of abdominals, spinal extensors, gluteals, or any other musculature. Rather, core stabilization is accomplished through precise coordination of these muscles and intra-abdominal pressure, which is regulated by the central nervous system. So one of the really important takeaways to that is our nervous system assigns the roles of all the muscles. The muscles don't decide, right? The nervous system delegates the workload, and it's based on the task, and it's also based on the load. So your loading profile, your core profile is different when you are doing Ardha Uttanasana, a halfway lift, trying to maintain neutral, versus if you're doing like T lifts weights, right? That's different than doing a deadlift with 200 pounds. I need different pressure in my core between those two movements. So because yoga is unloaded movement, it's not always necessary to like grip and contain and squeeze your core muscles in a kind of relatively low effort position like Tadasana, or even an upright position in Warrior 2. There doesn't have to be a whole lot of gripping and lifting and squeezing in the core there, because there isn't really a lot of demand on the spine in that position. And like I said earlier, your nervous system's already ahead of your conscious engagement. If we had to decide what muscles to engage to do everything that we did, we wouldn't get anything done. Like even just walking, there's so much going on there that you don't even have to think about. Yeah, I think that's all I had in my notes. Any other questions or remarks or concerns? What was that? Well, I have 4 every week for members of the studio, but I also just made it available that you could just buy a drop-in. So the mobility classes are always Monday at noon, and then Wednesday nights at 6 is kind of a restorative, kind of like my Sunday 9:45 at Pavilions. And then Friday morning at 6 a.m. is a strong flow class, slow and strong flow. And then Saturday morning at 10 is also a slow and strong flow. And those two I try to make just slightly different, maybe with the same kind of theme. So I have 4 of those a week. You can either drop in and do a class like this where it's just through Zoom, or if you become a studio member, you would have access to all of the pre-recorded content. So right now I'm recording on a separate device, and that's gonna get saved to YouTube. And then let's say Kelly, she's not here right now, Kelly wants to watch this class later, she can then watch it on demand. So the drop-in, you only get the live class. But studio membership, you get the playback too. And it's like HD video, good sound. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Well, it would be more than that. It would be 4 classes per week times 4, because there's 4 weeks in a month. So $25 would be the virtual membership. So that would give you access to unlimited classes. You give you access to watching, like let's say you missed tomorrow night's class, you wanted to watch it on Thursday morning, you could do that. But if you just pay per class, like if you just paid $10 for this class, you would only get to experience it live. You couldn't go back and watch it later. Yep, and then they go to an archive, and you can watch those as many times as you want. And only members have access to that. So I only have a few videos on YouTube that are like open to the public. The rest of it is reserved for people like, you know, that see me week to week and I know them, and I kind of am maybe designing my classes with some of their needs in mind. And it also, I think, helps to kind of keep us connected and build this community. So we have a Facebook group too. And so I have another gal who's watching on Facebook right now. She doesn't use Zoom, or she uses Zoom for something else. So she's watching on Facebook. And so there's 2 ways to watch, whether it's Zoom or Facebook. You can do either one. You could go to my website. There's a couple different ways to do it. And I have the recommended $25 a month, but then I also have a different area where you can pledge either $15 a month or $25 a month, just depending on what you can afford. Like I know a lot of people who are out of work right now, and I want to be sure that I'm, you know, being conscious of that while still, you know, trying to also keep myself afloat. So there's 2 different ways. You can go to the store on my website, the store tab, or you can go to the practice tab. In the practice tab is where you can do the $15 a month or the $25 a month. In the store tab, you can either buy an individual class pass or you can buy the $25 monthly unlimited membership. Everything, live and pre-recorded. Yeah. Unlimited. So you could watch, like if you really liked the Rest and Restore from last Wednesday night, you could do that class 100 times. It'll never go away. No, it's not actually on auto pay. You're responsible for paying when you pay. And what I'd like to do is get everybody on the same billing cycle. So if you pay me today, your next payment would be due March 1st, but you can prorate it. So if you paid $25 a month, you just need to figure out what the prorated payment would be, or I can figure that out for you. But I don't want to have to go to people and say, hey, you signed up on the 15th and it's the 15th and you need to pay. I just would rather put my effort into developing this content rather than doing accounting, which I suck at. So yeah, so if you sign up today, then on May 1st, when your payment comes up again and we're all like refreshing our memberships, then you pay the prorated, whatever it was for April or whatever. That way everybody's kind of on the same cycle. And then when you're done, you just don't send money anymore. And I changed the password to the virtual membership page, and so you just won't be able to get into it. So May 1st, the password will change and members will continue to get the new password. And then anybody who's like in the Facebook group after May 1st, if they don't want to renew, then I'll just boot them out of the private Facebook group and they just won't be able to access it anymore. And I never take that personally. I mean, I have a handful of subscriptions that I belong to. I've had to cut back on that, and I just tell them, I haven't had time. It's not a priority to me, and they're super cool with it, and I will be too. So I won't take it personally if you don't sign up. It's, it's something that's available, but we can still chat and hang out. And I'm still willing to do, some of this free content too. Is the other thing. Like, this is a free class. It's just to give you a taste of what's available. And I'll still put out free content on my YouTube page. I have one planned for sometime this week. I'm going to do yoga with weights. So it'll be an hour-long like flow class with weights, and that's just going to be free to anybody. So even if you don't sign up, I'm still going to have stuff for you. Somebody has a question. It's okay, you're not bothering me. Yeah. You could do it that way. Yeah, or you could, yeah, you could just prorate. Yeah, you could prorate April today, and then May 1st would be the first month that you'd pay 25. Yeah. If you go to the practice page instead of the store, so go to the practice tab, and then where it says, I think it says donate or contribute, there's more than one option there. So it's either 15 or 25. It says consider donating monthly. So if you don't, we'll just change the password, and if you don't renew your payment, then you just won't have access to it anymore. So there's nothing you need to cancel. That's right. Facebook is basically, you're watching me, you can type in the chat, and I can read those comments, but there's no dialogue because I can't see you and I can't hear you. So that's the one benefit of Zoom. The reason I use Facebook to actually do the recording is because Facebook will allow me to record and save my videos in HD. And the Zoom platform's video quality is pretty poor with the saved files. So the playback doesn't look as pretty, and it doesn't look as clean and clear, like you can't see as well. It looks kind of pixelated. That's why I'm using Facebook as kind of a balanced platform. Terrific. You're so welcome. Thanks for coming, everybody. I don't want to keep you too much longer. This was supposed to be 45 minutes, but I guess it is what it is.